It was a stormy night in the small town of Eldridge. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain beat against the windows of a quaint little house at the end of a quiet street. Inside, a man named Robert sat hunched over a ham radio, headphones snugly pressed to his ears. He was a ham radio enthusiast, spending most of his free time communicating with fellow operators from around the world. But tonight, as he tuned into the radio frequencies, he felt an unsettling chill in the air, one he couldn't quite shake. Robert had been an amateur radio operator for as long as he could remember. He loved the thrill of reaching out to distant corners of the globe, making friends with people he would never meet in person. But there was something different about this night. He had always been a man of logic and reason, dismissing tales of the supernatural as mere superstitions. But what happened that evening would shake the very core of his beliefs. As the static crackled through the headphones, Robert adjusted the dials, searching for the perfect frequency. He had a well-equipped station, complete with a powerful transceiver and a large antenna that reached high into the night sky. It was the perfect setup for reaching far-off locations, and Robert had made many friends around the world through his conversations on the radio. He pressed the transmit button and sent out his call sign, K9RJ, hoping to strike up a conversation with someone interesting. Moments passed and he received a response from a fellow operator in Australia. They exchanged pleasantries and Robert was about to ask about the weather down under when something strange happened. The voice on the other end crackled with an eerie distortion, and Robert could barely make out the words. K9RJ, beware, the Dark One. Listen closely. Robert frowned and adjusted his equipment, thinking it was just a technical glitch. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Your signal is a bit fuzzy. There was a long pause, and then the voice returned, even more distorted and filled with an unsettling static. Listen closely, the Dark One comes. Robert's heart raced as he heard those cryptic words. He had never encountered anything like this on the ham radio before. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it some kind of prank? A rogue transmission from a nearby station? Or was there something more sinister at play? He tried to respond, but all he heard in return was a series of bizarre, otherworldly noises. It was as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate with him in a way that defied explanation. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he strained to decipher the strange sounds. After several minutes of bizarre transmission, the voice returned, clearer this time, but still distorted and eerie. The Dark One draws near, closer, with each transmission. Robert's hands trembled as he disconnected from the Australian operator. He had no idea what was happening, but he couldn't simply dismiss it as a prank or a technical glitch. The words, the voice, and the strange sounds filled him with a sense of dread he had never experienced before. He decided to reach out to his friend and fellow ham radio enthusiast, Mark, who lived a few streets away. If anyone could make sense of this, it was Mark. Robert rushed to his computer and sent a message, urging Mark to come over as soon as possible. The storm outside seemed to intensify, with thunder and lightning providing a fitting backdrop to the growing unease within the house. Mark arrived in a hurry, looking just as bewildered as Robert felt. What's going on, Robert? Why did you sound so urgent in your message? Robert led Mark to the ham radio station and played back the strange transmission for him. As they listened, Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. I've never heard anything like this before, Robert. It's as if something beyond our understanding is trying to reach you. The two friends spent hours trying to decipher the transmission, recording the strange sounds and playing them back repeatedly. They attempted to filter out the static and noise, hoping to uncover any hidden message or meaning. But the more they delved into it, the more they realized they were dealing with something inexplicable. The voice, or whatever it was, continued to deliver cryptic warnings. The Dark One approaches closer with each transmission. You must listen. You must heed. Robert and Mark shared a look of growing dread. The storm outside had intensified, and the howling wind seemed to echo the strange words that emanated from the radio. They couldn't dismiss it any longer. Something sinister was afoot. As the night wore on, the transmission grew more insistent and ominous. The voice, now sounding even more inhuman, repeated the same message over and over. "The Dark One is near, closer with each transmission. You must listen." Their attempts to contact other operators on different frequencies were met with the same eerie message. It was as if the entire radio spectrum had been hijacked by this malevolent force. Robert and Mark were trapped in a nightmarish loop of repetition, with no way to escape. With each transmission, the room seemed to grow colder, and the atmosphere grew oppressive. The walls appeared to close in on them, and the shadows deepened. The storm outside had become a tempest, shaking the house as if the very earth itself were rebelling against the intrusion of this dark entity. Robert's rational mind began to unravel. He had always been a skeptic, but what he was experiencing defied all logic. As the hours passed, the message grew clearer, as if the entity behind it was coming closer, making itself known. Mark clutched his head in frustration. What is this Dark One? What does it want? Robert could only shake his head, his voice trembling. I don't know, Mark. But whatever it is, it's real and it's here. As the night reached its darkest point, the transmission reached its zenith. The voice was no longer distorted, and the message became unmistakably clear. The Dark One is here, with you, in the room. Robert and Mark froze, their eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of the dark entity that had drawn near. The storm outside seemed to pause, as if holding its breath, waiting for the climax of this macabre performance. Suddenly, the lights in the house flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and a bone-chilling silence descended. They could hear each other's ragged breaths, but there was something else, something inhuman, a presence that seemed to lurk just beyond their senses. With trembling hands, Robert fumbled for a flashlight and turned it on, illuminating the room in a feeble, flickering glow. What he saw sent a wave of terror coursing through his veins. In the corner of the room, shrouded in shadow, a grotesque figure began to materialize. Its form was indistinct, shifting and morphing as if it were made of smoke and darkness. Its eyes, two piercing orbs of malevolence, locked onto Robert and Mark with an intensity that seared their souls. "The Dark One," Robert whispered, his voice barely audible as the room seemed to close in around them and the storm outside raged on. The figure in the corner stretched out its shadowy hand, beckoning them closer, and the room seemed to pulsate with an unnatural energy. Robert and Mark knew they had to make a choice that could mean the difference between life and death. In the end, they chose to confront the entity. With flashlight in hand, they approached the figure in the corner, their hearts pounding in their chests. The closer they got, the more the room seemed to distort and twist, as if it were a passage to another realm. The figure reached out and touched Robert's shoulder, sending a jolt of cold terror through his body. In that moment, he understood that they were dealing with something beyond their comprehension, a malevolent force from the darkest corners of existence. As the entity's grip tightened, Robert and Mark could feel their minds being invaded, their very thoughts and memories laid bare. They saw visions of unspeakable horrors, of worlds beyond imagination, and of the Dark One's insatiable hunger for their souls. In the end, they were left with no choice but to disconnect the ham radio. With a swift motion, Robert yanked the power cord from the wall, severing the connection to the otherworldly transmission. The room returned to normal, the shadows receded, and the storm outside began to dissipate. They were safe, but they knew they would never be the same. The experience had left a mark on their souls, a lingering dread that would haunt them for the rest of their days. As the sun rose on a new day, Robert and Mark sat in the dimly lit room, their faces etched with the knowledge of the unknown. They had come face to face with a dark entity that defied all explanation, and it had left them with a chilling truth. There are forces in the universe that are far beyond human understanding, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be heard. And if you listen closely, you may just hear their call. Dare to delve into the unknown with chilling ghost tales. Then subscribe for weekly videos of the eeriest tales and darkest legends now.